If you had looked at a map of the world in that era and compared the terrifying size of the Soviet Union, that red giant swallowing the horizon, with the tiny size of Finland, that forgotten white spot in the far north, you would have immediately said that this was not a war, but a crushing hit-and-run operation. A fleeting military picnic where soldiers would return to have dinner and celebrate in Moscow without even getting their boots dirty. This is exactly what the leaders of the Kremlin thought. They mobilized an army that blocked out the sun, thousands of iron tanks, and swarms of aircraft to invade a country that possessed no noteworthy standing army, but rather a group of farmers and lumberjacks wearing civilian clothes and skiing on ice. But what happened next was a shock that made the whole world drop its jaw in amazement. As soon as the tanks crossed the border, they found themselves facing an enemy they hadn't accounted for in their military maps. An enemy called the killer Finnish weather. Temperatures plummeted to levels that froze blood in the veins. The dense forests turned into an open morgue, and the engines of the Soviet tanks froze, becoming nothing more than useless piles of iron. Gun oil froze, and even bread became stone that broke teeth. While the Russian soldier, coming from the plains, shivered in his dark clothes that made him a clear target, like a black fly on white paper, the Finns were true ghosts. They appeared from nowhere in their snow-white gear, striking quick, painful blows while skiing with unbelievable agility, then melting into the fog before the enemy realized what had happened. In this documentary, we will see how the small neighbor turned into a terrifying nightmare for the great empire. We will see how the Finns used empty liquor bottles filled with fuel to burn steel monsters, and how they used tree trunks and darkness to dismember the invading army. We will also learn the story of the sniper who terrified entire battalions with his deadly silence. Prepare to enter the details of a very strange war, where the trees spoke Finnish, the snow fired bullets, and the huge bear found itself stuck in a very small trap, but one sharp enough to nearly cut off its claw. Let's imagine this surreal scene together, one that usually only happens in dark comedies. Giant Soviet tanks weighing tons of thick steel, equipped with cannons capable of leveling fortresses, finding themselves defeated and burning because of an empty liquor bottle and a rag. Yes, this was the beginning of the Finnish legend. While the world waited for Finland's surrender, the Finns decided to throw a very special welcome party for their unwanted guests.
The official drink of this party was what they sarcastically named the Molotov cocktail, named after the Soviet foreign minister who falsely claimed his planes weren't bombing Finland, but dropping bread baskets for the hungry. The Finns replied, "Then we will provide the drink to go with the food." Thus, the iconic weapon of the underdog was born. But using this weapon was no picnic. It required a special kind of madness and suicidal courage. To destroy a tank with a bottle, you couldn't stand far away and throw it. You had to get close enough that your breathing was audible to the tank commander. Finnish soldiers would hide in deep snow holes, letting the giant tank pass right over their heads. As the ground shook, engines roared, and tracks ground the snow next to their ears, the soldier would suddenly jump from behind, light the fuse, and throw the bottle with surgical precision onto the rear engine ventilation grates. In seconds, the cold steel turned into a blazing oven.
Fire and smoke blinded the crew inside, transforming a machine that cost the state a fortune into a burning heap of scrap, all because of a bottle of gasoline costing mere pennies. Bottles weren't the only strange weapon. The Finns used their country's terrain with demonic intelligence. Finnish forests are very dense, and the roads are narrow and winding. The Soviet army made a fatal mistake by bringing their heavy machinery into this maze. Here, the Finns applied a terrifying military tactic they called mati, a term meaning cutting firewood. Instead of facing the Russian army head-on, they allowed the long Russian convoy to enter deep into the forest. Then they cut off the road from the front and the back using tree trunks and mines. The Russians became trapped in a long, narrow tube, unable to advance or retreat. The tanks, piled up behind one another, turned into a massive traffic jam that prevented movement.
In the darkness of the merciless polar night, the Finnish lumberjacks began their work. They emerged from the trees in total silence on their skis, attacking the stalled convoy and slicing it into small, isolated segments, like slicing a sausage. Then they began liquidating these parts one by one. The Russian soldiers trapped inside their tanks lived through indescribable psychological horror. Locked inside freezing iron boxes, hearing the sounds of bullets and destruction outside, but seeing nothing. If one dared to open the hatch, he met his end via a sniper's bullet or the deadly cold. Thus, the beautiful forest turned into an open graveyard for iron and men. The Finns proved to the world that a powerful tank is worthless if it is blind, paralyzed, and surrounded by ghosts who know how to burn it. If Molotov cocktails were the fiery hell that burned the tanks, the forest was hiding another hell, one that was cold, silent, and far more frightening.
A hell embodied in the figure of one short man, a simple farmer named Simo Häyhä. In the eyes of the Russians, this man transformed from a mere enemy soldier into a demonic entity they nicknamed the White Death. In that war, the terror didn't lie in the noise of cannons, but in the silence that preceded a Russian soldier suddenly falling with a small hole in the middle of his forehead, without anyone hearing a shot until it was too late. Russian patrols turned into funeral processions where soldiers walked looking at the trees in terror, realizing the ghost was watching them right now, choosing his next victim with inhuman cold-bloodedness. The marvel of Simo's story wasn't just his kill count, which exceeded hundreds in a few months, but how he did it. This man broke all the rules of modern sniping. He refused to use a telescopic sight, which every sniper in the world uses. He preferred to rely on the old, traditional iron sights. The reason was as genius as it was simple. A glass scope might reflect sunlight, revealing his position, and it forces the sniper to raise his head a few extra centimeters. Simo didn't want to give the enemy even that single centimeter. He wanted to remain a piece of the earth, invisible, a breathing rock, or a tree trunk that fired bullets. To disappear completely in this white world, Simo invented survival techniques that would make a polar bear look like an amateur. He would pack snow densely in front of his rifle barrel so that the snowy dust wouldn't fly up when he fired, revealing his location. Even more astounding, he would fill his mouth with snow and chew on it constantly while lying in his ambush, not because he was thirsty, but to cool his mouth from the inside, so that the hot steam of his breath wouldn't escape into the cold air and expose him. Imagine the level of patience and endurance of a man lying in -40 degrees Celsius, his mouth full of snow, his body covered in a white sheet like a shroud, waiting for long hours without moving a single eyelash, just to seize the perfect moment to send a Russian officer to the other world. The Russians tried with all their might to get rid of this nightmare. They sent their professional snipers to kill him. They returned in coffins. They sent entire squads to comb the forest. He hunted them one by one as if hunting wild rabbits. In the peak of their despair and anger, they began bombing random areas of the forest with heavy artillery, blind shelling in the hope that a shell might accidentally land on this stubborn farmer's head. But he survived every time and returned the next day to hunt from a new location.
Simo Häyhä turned into a lethal psychological weapon that made Russian soldiers afraid to lift their heads from the trenches and made officers rip their military ranks off their shoulders so the sniper wouldn't distinguish them. He defeated an entire army, not by the force of arms, but by the force of fear, proving that one man who knows how to melt into the snow is more dangerous than 1,000 tanks that don't know where to go. In traditional wars, it is said that armies march on their stomachs, an old Napoleonic saying that the Soviet generals completely forgot in the rush of their enthusiasm for the invasion. They sent hundreds of thousands of soldiers into the White Hell with catastrophic logistical supplies, cut off roads, and frozen field kitchens. After 2 weeks of fighting, the poor Russian soldier turned into a shivering skeleton, living on dry bread and a little tea, dreaming of a hot meal more than he dreamed of victory.
Here, the Finns realized with their cunning intelligence that the smell of food could be a weapon deadlier than mines, and that the enemy's empty stomach was their primary strategic ally. The peak of this absurdity is manifested in the famous historical incident that historians called the Sausage War. One pitch-black night, a massive and daring Soviet battalion succeeded in breaking through the rear lines of the Finnish defenses. It was a major tactical military victory. The Russian soldiers suddenly found themselves inside a Finnish camp that had been hastily evacuated. But instead of securing the site, pursuing the fleeing enemy, or even sending a victory telegram to command, time suddenly stopped. The war stopped. Rifles fell from hands. Why? Because they found the treasure. The treasure wasn't gold or secret maps. It was huge pots boiling over fires, full of rich, hot Finnish sausage soup.
The smell of garlic, fat, and meat wafted out, a scent that made the starving soldiers dizzy and caused the officers to lose control over their men. In a moment of collective madness, the Russians forgot they were in the middle of a war. They gathered around the pots, letting children scoop soup with their hands and helmets, devouring sausages with the greed and ferocity of those who hadn't seen food in ages, leaving their backs exposed and weapons cast on the snow. Survival instinct defeated all military orders. At the height of this insane feast, the Finns returned. They hadn't fled, they had merely retreated into the forest to reorganize. When they came back, they found their enemy in their weakest state, stuffed, slow, and happy with the food. The Finns launched a lightning-fast, brutal attack. The camp turned into a slaughterhouse where hundreds of Russian soldiers were killed, with pieces of sausage still in their mouths.
Many died with full stomachs for the first time in weeks, in a scene combining tragedy and farce. The sausage battle ended with a very harsh lesson. Do not stop to eat on Finnish land, because the bill will be your life. On the other side of the scene, the Finns were practicing another type of comfortable psychological and physical warfare, the sauna tactic. While the Russians slept in the open or inside their iron tanks that had turned into refrigerators with freezing limbs and infected wounds, the Finnish soldiers took turns returning to the nearby rear lines where the sacred saunas existed. There, the soldier would strip off his frozen clothes, enter a hot steam bath that melted the frost from his bones, cleaned his body, and soothed his nerves. Then he would go out to roll in the snow, a crazy Finnish custom to stimulate blood circulation, and return to fight the next day, clean, warm, and psychologically rested. The war was being fought between an army of frozen, starving zombies and an army of athletes who had just showered and eaten a hot meal. The result was predetermined in favor of those who possessed the warmth and the sausages. While the forests witnessed a sausage war, the Finnish cities witnessed a stranger type of war, a technological and musical war unparalleled in history. When the Russian army withdrew from the strategic city of Vyborg, they left behind a very malicious parting gift: hundreds of sophisticated radio-controlled mines hidden under buildings and bridges, designed to detonate remotely as soon as a radio signal was sent on a specific frequency. It was a demonic plan to turn the city into rubble over the heads of the victorious Finns. But Finnish Army engineers discovered the secret at the last moment and identified the frequency on which the detonation signal would be sent.
Here, they faced a dilemma. How do we stop the Russians from sending the signal when we don't possess advanced jamming equipment? The solution was genius and crazy to the point of hilarity. The Finns decided to jam the Russian frequency using folk music. They brought a radio broadcast truck and played a record of a fast, very cheerful country song called Säkkijärven Polka. It is a song that relies on rapid accordion playing. They broadcast this song on the same frequency as the mines at maximum power for 3 continuous days without stopping for a single second. Imagine the surreal scene. A destroyed city, exhausted soldiers, the danger of death everywhere, and the only thing everyone hears on the radio is dance music, cheerful, and played thousands of times. The music succeeded in occupying the mine frequency and blocked the Russian detonation signal from getting through.
The Russian generals exploded in anger instead of the mines, while the threatened city danced to the tune of the polka that saved it from annihilation in one of the funniest electronic battles in history. Returning to the desolate forests, the situation was far less fun. The
The Finns succeeded in applying the Modi tactic, siege and slice, with terrifying skill. They encircled entire Soviet divisions, consisting of thousands of soldiers, inside isolated pockets in the forest. They cut off supply routes, denied them food and ammunition, and left them to face their slow fate. Here began the tragedy of the army eating itself. In the first days of the siege, the poor quality canned food ran out. Soldiers started looking at their horses, which pulled the cannons, with a different gaze, a hungry gaze. The loyal horses suddenly turned into field shawarma, slaughtered and eaten down to the last bone in a desperate feast amidst the snow. But the siege dragged on for weeks, and the horses ran out. Here, the besieged entered the stage of the Black Famine. Russian soldiers began searching for anything organic that could be chewed. They resorted to boiling military leather belts for long hours in hot water to try to soften and eat them. Then they moved to the soles of their boots and pieces of remaining horse saddles. Imagine an entire army supposed to occupy Finland in 2 days, now sitting in frozen holes, chewing the soles of their old shoes, filled with the taste of sweat and mud. Their eyes stared at the sky, waiting for supply planes that never came, or came only to drop food by mistake over the Finnish positions, who ate it and thanked Comrade Stalin for his generosity. At the peak of this psychological collapse, the Finns used the weapon of banners. They set up large signs on the edges of the besieged forest, written in bold Russian. "Does your shoe taste good today, comrade?"
We have bread, butter, and hot tea. Just throw down your rifle and come over. They were simple messages, but devastating. They broke what remained of the starving soldier's pride, making him realize that his leadership in Moscow had completely forgotten him, and that the enemy he was fighting knew everything about him, even the quality of his miserable leather dinner. On the morning of March 13th, a sudden and strange silence prevailed in the forests. The whiz of bullets stopped, the cannons fell silent, and the white symphony of death ended. But this silence was not the silence of victory, it was the silence of exhaustion. In the end, despite all the superhuman heroism and despite all the burned tanks, numbers won over courage. The Soviet Union, that wounded dragon bleeding profusely, finally decided to throw all its demographic weight into the fight, crushing the Finnish front with endless human waves.
This forced the Finnish government to make the hardest decision in its history, signing a peace treaty, or rather an amputation treaty, conceding 11% of the homeland's territory in exchange for preserving the state's independence. But let's look at the bill of this alleged Soviet victory. To get this piece of land, Stalin sacrificed more than 127,000 dead soldiers, compared to only 25,000 Finns, and lost thousands of tanks and hundreds of aircraft. It was a Pyrrhic victory with the taste of defeat, a shameful victory that made the whole world laugh at the performance of the clumsy Red Army, and made Hitler in Berlin watch what was happening and smile maliciously, believing that the Russian bear was nothing but a giant structure of clay that would collapse with a single blow, a wrong belief that led him to invade Russia later. The Winter War was the peel upon which everyone slipped toward World War II. As for the true human tragedy, it was manifested in the evacuation process. When the residents of the ceded areas learned their homes and lands would come under Soviet rule, they did something heartbreaking. Not a single Finnish citizen remained there. They packed their belongings, took their cattle, and then burned their homes, farms, and villages with their own hands. They burned everything, so the Russian invaders would find nothing but ashes to live in. They applied the scorched earth principle with bitterness, saying to their enemy, "You took the land, but you will not take the warmth that was in it." They walked in long, sad caravans towards the Finnish interior, refugees in their own homeland, but holding their heads high because they did not kneel and did not turn into puppets in the hands of the dictator. Finland lost the land, but it won the soul. It won the world's respect and proved that Sisu, a Finnish word meaning insane perseverance and courage in the face of the impossible, is not just a word, but a lifestyle.
The Russian bear came out of the forest limping, with a broken claw and a psychological complex regarding the color white that would stay with him forever. Meanwhile, the little Finn remained standing, wiping the blood from his face and fixing his broken ski, ready for the next winter.